Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the Style Studio. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Madison. I'm an Instagram creator, blogger, and high school fashion design teacher. And here on YouTube, I film sewing videos and tutorials along with the occasional travel vlogs. All in all, to share my love and passion for fashion with you all. You can also follow along on all of my style adventures over on Instagram at Miss Madison Lynn. I'm so excited about today's video, so if you like what you see, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you can stay updated on all of my latest videos, project, and tutorials. And leave me a comment letting me know what you would like to see more of in the future. Now without further ado, let's get designing. So for this recycle and redesign project, I'm going to be using two curtains that I got at our local thrift store. My design inspiration as of late, honestly, is just to be Maria from The Sound of Music and to make things out of curtains or bed sheets or tablecloths. So when I originally got these curtains, I was kind of thinking of making a play suit or a romper because I felt like the colors and the stripes were just super playful. But I was actually working on a different project and I got the idea for this dress, so I decided to kind of sketch it out and see what happens. And so I decided to go with the dress because I wanted to be a little bit more girly, and so I designed a dress that has ruffles at the top. It also has more of like a high-waisted baby doll design, and then it also has ruffles at the bottom. And as I go throughout this project, I decided to play with directionality on the ruffles. So the dress itself is going to have vertical stripes, and then the ruffles at the top and bottom of the dress, and the ones I add later on at the waist are going to be horizontal, just to be really playful, because I feel like the stripes and the colors really lend itself to be playful, and it's also a summer dress. So as most of my projects go, I ended up using a slipper for the bodice of my dresses, and then for the skirt section, I'm just working with measurements. So I used one curtain for the front of my skirt and one curtain for the back, since I knew that they were the perfect width to get the right amount of gather for the dress design that I wanted to have. So since my skirt of my dress is going to have a thick ruffle at the bottom, I measured out my skirt to be about like 20 inches, I think, and it's going to be on the vertical stripe, so I made sure to cut that marking off of both sections. And then because I wanted to play with directionality of my ruffles when it came time for it, I decided to cut my ruffles to have the stripes going in the opposite direction. So while my skirt sections have stripes going vertically, the ruffles at the bottom of my dress are going to go horizontally. So I just used the side sections of my curtains to cut those off, and I think I made them about 8 inches. So I cut that off of both sides to make sure that I had wide enough pieces of fabric that were way wider than my skirt itself, so that I could gather that and have a nice gather at the bottom. And the rest of my fabric I'm going to use to cut my bodice and my top ruffles. So I also decided to use the little green sections at the top of my curtains, which would have been where the curtain rod went through, to actually make my straps so that they were kind of a solid color and be a little bit of pop on my dress. So I ended up cutting some of those pieces off and decided to use them as my straps, since I wanted to somehow integrate it into my design. So one thing I have learned through doing different recycle and redesign projects is that when you're using fabric that isn't actually technically fabric, it's not from a fabric store, you're gonna have to play around for a little bit to figure out how you fold it to make sure you have enough to cut all of your pieces. So now I'm going ahead and working on my bodice. Like I said, I'm using my slippers. I didn't actually have to adapt these slippers all that much. I didn't completely draft a new piece. I knew that I wanted the bodice of my dress to have a curve around the top, so I just kind of cut that curve on the fabric itself. And then since it's going to be more of a baby doll style top, I ended up just tracing half of my bodice sloper, so that I would just be kind of a cropped bodice, and then I just drew in a section of my dart since it wasn't going to be a full bodice size, so it was super easy and I didn't have to completely draft a new pattern. Same thing goes for the back of my dress. Obviously the back is going to have more of a scooped back rather than a curve along the top like the front of my bodice. So I went ahead and just traced my back sloper and just created it to be cropped as well, and then drew in a curve for my back and marked all of my darts. So one of my first steps on any dress project is always to mark my darts and pin them into place. So I went ahead and did that after I traced my bodice. Went ahead and pinned my darts so I could go over to my machine and sew them, and then start actually sewing the bodice together. So before I do anything else, I'm going to sew my darts into place, and then I'm also going to sew the sides of my bodices together, so attaching the front to the back piece, and also doing the same for the lining piece, which is the exact same as my regular bodice piece, since this is going to be self-lined. So once my bodice pieces were sewn together, I took it over to my mannequin to do a fitting and see if there was anything I needed to tweak, and I realized that the curved neckline of my bodice in the front was a little too high, so I just made some markings so that I could trim that off and then also adapt that on my lining of my bodice. So I went ahead and just chopped that off since I drew that line in, and then now that they are equal, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of lay them out and figure out how I want to do the ruffle for the top section of my bodice, since I want to have that ruffle along the top curve. And like I said, I'm playing with directionality for my ruffles, so I wanted to make sure that I cut my pieces with horizontal stripe since my bodice is vertical. So I just went to my extra fabric that I had and started marking those out, and then I also went ahead and cut some pockets. Once I had my ruffle pieces of fabric, I just took them over to my sewing machine, folded them in half, set my machine to a basting stitch, and then ran a long basting stitch down the raw edge of my fabric pieces that I'm then going to go in and gather for my ruffles on my bodice of the dress. And if you're wondering what I'm watching on my laptop while I'm doing this project, I was watching NCIS. I don't know about you, but I always like to have something on in the background, whether or not that's an audiobook or something from Netflix or Hulu or Amazon. And so for this specific project, I was binging a lot of episodes of NCIS. So before I pin the ruffles onto the top section of my bodice, I took it back over to my mannequin to work out the placement for my straps. So when I sew my straps onto my dress, they're actually going to be sewn on with my ruffle so that they're kind of hidden behind it and also kind of sandwiched in between my lining. So I went ahead and just kind of laid those on my mannequin, pinned them into place, and then put some markings where I knew I wanted that placement to be, so that when I go and pin my ruffle, everything is kind of even as it should. So now that my basting stitch is in my ruffle, I'm just going to go in and gather all of that up, which is the, again, tedious project of gathering, but it makes for gorgeous designs at the end. So once all of my ruffles are gathered, I took it over to my bodice to make sure that my ruffles were the correct length to be sewn along the top edge of my bodice, and they were. So once all of the ruffles are evenly placed with their gathers, I'm then going to sandwich that in between my lining piece and also insert my straps. So there's a lot of layers at work here, but it ends up having a really nice finish along the edge. So I'm working with 3 pieces, my bodice front and back, which is my outer bodice. I'm working with my ruffles, and then that is being sandwiched in between my lining, and then I'm also going to stick my straps into the front sections of my bodice so that it's sewn in at the beginning, and then it will eventually be hidden behind my ruffles, as you'll see later on, and it actually made it look so good. So I do want to note that all of these pieces are right sides together right now. That's a huge, really important step to make sure that they're all being pinned right sides together and all sandwiched on top of each other. And as you can see in this frame, you can actually tell that I went ahead and inserted those green straps so that they'll actually be hidden behind the ruffle, as you'll see later on. Once all those pins are put into place, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew across the top, and then flip it right side out and start attaching all the rest of my pieces. So one thing you'll start to notice in all of my sewing videos is how I place my pins into my fabric as I'm sewing, and then also how I remove them. So I always pin my fabric together with my pins going vertically instead of horizontally. Some people pin them horizontally and then sew over my pins, but I prefer to just take them out as I go, so vertically works really well. So I realized I needed to cut more fabric for the ruffles on the bottom of my dress, and because I'm working with stripes, I had to make sure that all of my stripes were going to match up on the side. So that's what I'm doing here, is cutting additional pieces and then sewing them together on the sides. And I went ahead and sewed them, and then I just serged those raw edges. Again, serging is an optional step. You do not have to finish your edges, but I prefer to finish all of mine on a serger. You can also use zigzags or rolled stitching. Once all of my side seams were finished, I went ahead and serged the bottom edge of my ruffle. That way all I have to do is just press it up 1/2 inch and then sew it into place for my hem instead of rolling it multiple times. So this is a quick, easy step, is to serge it, press it up 1/2 inch, and then sew that hem. And then before I sew the sides of my skirt together, I'm going to attach my pockets. So I love having pockets in skirts or dresses that I create, and so I'm going to pin those onto the sides of my skirt, right where my side seam essentially is going to be later on. And I pin my pockets about 4 inches down, and then I make sure to place them right sides together onto my skirts. Once those are pinned into place, all you have to do is sew the edges of your skirt, and then you kind of curve out over the pockets. Once your pockets are sewn into place, all you do is pin the front of your skirt to the back of your skirt right sides together. So you just pin all the way down the side, and then you also pin along the curve of the pockets, since you will curve out as you're sewing your sides, and that's what actually creates your pockets. Pockets are so cool when you learn how to do them, and they're honestly so easy, so that's why I put them in everything that I can. So when I got to the next step in my project, which was attaching the skirt to my bodice, I realized and decided that I wanted another ruffle because you can never have too many ruffles. So I decided that I would add one to the top of my skirt, which is essentially the bottom of my bodice. So I just cut a piece that was the exact same width around the top of my skirt and made sure my stripes were horizontal, and then I just basted that onto the top section of my skirt so that it could be all gathered together before it's attached to my bodice. To make sure that I have a strong gather along the waistband of my skirt, I went ahead and put a second basting stitch underneath my first, and then I'll gather both of those together. I'm also going to go in and gather the bottom ruffle for my skirt so that I can go ahead and attach that to my skirt before I sew it onto my bodice. So I just go in and pull those gathers to make sure that they're evenly spread out across the circumference. Once all of the gathers on my ruffle are complete, I went ahead and pinned it to the bottom edge of my skirt. So I pinned it on, making sure that I still had right sides together all around the bottom of my skirt. Then I'm going to go ahead and sew that into place and then press it down. Now that the ruffles are completed for the bottom edge of my skirt, I can start to work on the gathers for the waistband of my skirt. So I go into those basting stitches that I made, I tie my little tails of thread together, and then I just start to gather those across my waistband. Now this skirt has a lot of fabric, so I'm going to have to do a lot of gathers to make sure that it fits my waist for my measurements and also fits the waist of my bodice. So one thing I always make sure to do when I'm attaching my bodice to my skirt is to make sure that I match up my side seams. So these are the side seams of my bodice and also the side seams of my skirt. That way everything will fit proportionally on my body and nothing will be crooked. So once I match up my side seams, I can then go in and start to actually pin my bodice onto my skirt. And since my bodice has a lining, we're again going to just sandwich those gathers of the top section of my skirt between my bodice front or the outside of my bodice, in between that and the lining, and I just pin that across. And before this, I actually went and pressed up the edges of my bodice 1/2 inch so that those raw edges would be encased on the inside. Once my bodice is pinned to my skirt, all we have to do is attach that by sewing it across the waist area of my dress on my sewing machine. And then once that's done, all we have to do is kind of fit it and then add the zipper. Alright, so I'm just doing the fitting of the dress. The fit honestly is between like fitted to your body and still super loose. I kind of wish that I had made it more baggy so it would have kind of been more like a sack dress, but honestly this is still super comfortable and it looks kind of how I was picturing it to look with the sketch. So I did go in and add this ruffle, which I'm really glad that I did. I think it kind of breaks it up with all the different ruffles going in the opposite direction with the stripes, so I really like that. And there's the back, so I think all we have to do now is put in the zipper. And this dress also has pockets, which is super exciting. So for this dress, I'm just adding in a regular zipper. So my method for adding in zippers is really interesting because I always sew the back of my dress together on a basting stitch, and then I go in and pin my zipper into place centered on that seam. And then once my zipper is sewn into place, all I have to do is rip that basting stitch out, and this allows me to make sure that my zipper is straight, that all of my seams are aligned, and it's a really easy and quick kind of hack in a way that I like to attach all of my zippers. So that's what I'm doing now, is pinning my zipper into place. As you can see, there's a seam where it's attached, and then all of my pins are going in the direction that I'm going to sew it. And then I just make sure I have my zipper foot on my sewing machine, and all I do is sew down the left side, then I pivot and sew up the right side. Alright, so this is my favorite step in adding in zippers, is going in to rip out the basting stitch so that my zipper will actually work. And now that my zipper is installed, my dress is done. So here is the reveal of my dress, the finished product. I am so excited about how this dress turned out. It definitely fits all of the visions that I had in my head and how I sketched it out. And it's definitely one of those super fun, girly, just bright and airy and very comfortable summer dresses. Plus it has pockets and tons of ruffles, which I love, and you really cannot go wrong with stripes. So I really loved how this turned out, and it's a style that I haven't really tried before, so I'm glad that I kind of just threw a lot of different things together and made it work. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you were inspired by what you can do with curtains. Leave me a comment below letting me know what you liked most about this dress or what you might want to see more of in the future. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any new videos, projects, or tutorials.